Well, welcome to Chicago Health Television. I'm here with four people who have just given a seminar called The Insider Secrets to Government Corruption. And Chip Tatum is one of the people. Welcome to the show. Also, Ted Gunderson, welcome to the show. Brice Taylor, welcome. And Barbara Hartwell, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks, okay. Now, I'm going to just direct the questions to each and every one of you. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about what you were doing and what the purpose of the seminar was. So many of our viewers and listeners have not really had exposure or especially detailed information about what we're doing. So if you could just simply generalize and tell us what's going on with the insider corruption. Who'd like to start?
You want me to start?
All right, Ted.
Why me?
First, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I was in the FBI for 27 and a half years, and at the time of my retirement in 1979, I was the senior special agent in charge of the FBI Los Angeles office. I had over 700 people under my command. We had, for jurisdiction, most of Southern California, over 14 million people within the area over which we had jurisdiction. And let's see, I was honored as the Outstanding Law Enforcement Officer of the Year in 1977 by the AFL-CIO Metal Trades Union in Los Angeles. I was asked by Attorney General Griffin Bell when I retired to coordinate security for the Pan American Games. I worked as a consultant for the '84 Olympics, and I was a consultant to the California Narcotic Authority when Jerry Brown, was governor.
Well, you certainly had a lot of experience, haven't you?
Well, yeah, I probably overdid it, but as far as my introduction is concerned, but I figured I'd throw in the kitchen sink.
No, that's important.
Well, it's important to establish credibility.
Exactly.
And I have credibility, in spite of the fact that many people would like to say I don't have credibility, because since shortly after I retired, I developed information personally about just extensive corruption in the government, not only at the federal level, but all the way down to the city and state level across this country. And, I have the documentation, I have the research, and I have the personal knowledge, and I have personally investigated many of these situations. That's basically an overview.
Well, when you say corruption, there's a specific kind of corruption you're talking about that you focus on. Isn't that true?
No, really, corruption is pretty all-inclusive of I have information about corrupt judges, corrupt law enforcement, prosecutors, county officials, judges, and it runs the gamut. It's not really specific at all unless you, and as a matter of fact, it includes a number of areas. Like, for example, I have developed information in Nebraska in a case I investigated in the late 80s involving international trafficking of children and kidnapping that ties into an organization in Washington, D.C. known as the Finders, which is a covert CIA operation. Has been active since the early 1960s. I've furnished this information to authorities, the Attorney General of the United States, to the FBI. Nobody does anything about it. Now, if that isn't corruption, I don't know what is. That's corruption at a major level.
Oh, yes. And what you're doing here at the Global Sciences Convention is talking about corruption that is related to Brice and Barbara and Chip, isn't that so?
That's true. It all overlaps. It involves drugs, involves pornography, involves prostitution, it involves cults, pedophilia. There's people, as Chip will tell you, the CIA is involved in bed with the mob, the mobsters, and the people in the White House that have been active in blackmailing people, individuals, and also at other levels, not only the White House. And it just basically runs a gamut.
Well, is there some overarching or underpinning ideal or idea, some purpose behind this corruption rather than just making a little money on the side or whatever? Isn't there?
The bottom line is to take over the country and the world.
For what, though?
Power, greed. This goes back over 200 years, back to 1776, with the establishment of an organization known as the Illuminati. And if your listeners don't know what the Illuminati is, they need to run down to the library and look it up and do some research, because on May the 1st, 1776, a fellow named Adam Weishaupt, German, set forth 25 goals at the request of the Rothschild group that they needed to initiate in order to take over the world. We're talking about destroy the sovereignty of countries and destroy religions. And that's where it really started in modern day. And right today, believe it or not, and we have the documentation for this, we are probably 90%, their goals have probably been filled at the great rate of about 90%.
And what's happening now?
Well, we have, for example, executive orders by the president. Executive orders were established initially for the president to give orders to departmental heads. The presidents of the United States have actually set up executive orders with unlimited power, bypassing the Constitution, and there's executive orders in place today that can take over all banking, take over all forms of transportation, take over the harbors, take over air transportation, take over industry, take private property away from us, and the list goes on and on and on. And also, there's an executive order in place that the president can declare martial law in the event of a national emergency, in which case we have a dictatorship. I'm not sure we don't have a dictatorship today. It's probably a socialist government, totalitarian government.
And aren't we close to some kind of national emergency right now?
Well, there's a possibility of biological warfare, and we just had a scare out of Las Vegas, Nevada, anthrax scare, and yes, I think there's a good possibility that could come down. Now, a fellow named Larry Wayne Harris, who was apprehended by the FBI in Nevada recently, in fact, it was on February the 18th of this year, they thought he had some anthrax in his possession. It wasn't. It was some not antibiotics, but anti-serum vaccine. Vaccine. And fortunately, that was true. But at least one good thing came out of that. It alerted the American people as to what the problems were and the possibilities of what could happen to us.
Okay, now your seminar here tonight. I want to go on to a couple of the other guests here. You summarized what you were doing here tonight, and you had a 3-hour seminar. And our show is kind of short, so I'm going to move on and get another piece of the puzzle here. Brice, what about you? How about you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Brice Taylor, and I'm an intergenerational satanic ritual abuse survivor and government mind control survivor. And basically the ritual abuse was used as a trauma-based conditioning for mind control that I was put under by the CIA and was programmed at military bases and at NASA centers around the country in order to have my mind in mind control that was guaranteed through national security that I would never be able to remember or tell. However, due to an accident that I had, I was able to start having flashbacks, and I started remembering being prostituted and used in pornography from the time I was very young, used in child pornography, and then as I grew older, I was used by different presidents and governors, and I was flown in helicopters to different areas in Hollywood to be used by some of the people, the actors in Hollywood, as well as being used by different, like I was saying, different politicians. But Henry Kissinger was involved with creating a lot of my high-level programming, where he was able to use the technology that they had gleaned in all the research that was done to create in my mind what he called government mind files, where I was programmed to have a perfect photographic memory, and I was used to, as a human tape recorder of sorts, to pass messages between the officials and the global elitists that are planning to bring in the New World Order.
And that was the point I was thinking of. It. All of that you were used for on the service of this New World Order. Is that right?
Yes, I was. And actually, Bob Hope was my owner and owned also my daughter. And through that, we were used as like intelligence operatives to be sent in with specific instructions that we were programmed to target different individuals that they wanted to be able to enlist to work also for the New World Order.
And how did you get to be owned? Were you bought, or did Bob Hope buy you? Or?
Well, there were shows where they have like slave auctions where people are actually purchased. And the way I understood it was that, I mean, my parents and myself never received any money, and they just, actually the CIA kind of came in, I believe, and took over a lot of people that had been satanically, ritualistically abused, knowing that that type of abuse creates multiple personality disorder, and that this population could be used as a non-paid slave labor force without their own knowledge or awareness.
And how rampant would you say this is?
Well, I think that if you would look into a lot of the history of people that have spoken out in the past all over the country and how this has been all covered up, I think it's very rampant. And I think that there's people that have been programmed and used that are coming out now and speaking out. And when I speak at mental health conferences where I help psychiatrists and mental health professionals help deprogram and their clients, there's a lot of people now that are coming forward naming the same people and the same agenda of the New World Order and are in need of information to help their clients deprogram.
And, well, later you'll get to say a little bit about how some people may get some help watching our show, or our listeners, from you. And thanks for sharing that with us. Now, next, I want to move over to Chip from the Tatum Files. Is it Tatum Files? Tatum Chronicles, I'm sorry, yes. Would you say, you've been on our show before, and would you say a little bit about yourself and how you've contributed to this seminar tonight?
For over 20 years, I was a government spy working for the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the United States military intelligence entities in various capacities throughout the world in varying positions. In the primary years, I worked in the Southeast Asia environment. In the mid-'70s, I moved into Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, Romania. In the early '80s, I went into what people know as the black helicopters flying around in military operations in Task Force 160, based out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky, under the control of the National Security Council. From there, I went into Honduras and Nicaragua as a special operations CIA pilot flying for Ollie North and the National Security Council, bringing drugs into seeing that drugs were brought into the United States. We simply brought the drugs out of the Contra camps into designated areas in Honduras. They were then transferred into military and civilian aircraft and brought into the United States, dispersed to our children around the United States.
Now, are those drugs, this is getting off the point, but are those drugs, are they used somehow in the mind control with people like Brice and
well, some of the drugs that we were producing in the Contra camps, we were not only producing cocaine in the Contra camps, but there was a small bulb, green bulb, that we would produce a chemical out of. It comes from the nightshade family, and it's nicknamed Burundanga, the voodoo drug, and we would utilize that as a controlling agent for most of our activities. Yes.
I see. And now, how do you corroborate the evidence, the things that the other people were saying here today about the New World Order and whatnot? Could you?
Oh, there's no doubt. I sat in a meeting in 1989. My handler in the CIA was Colby. I was then passed on to George Bush when he became director of the CIA. As a trusted ally of Mr. Bush, I sat in meetings in Jupiter, Florida. We did the deeds for this group of New World Order participants. We actually we called them within the bounds of where we worked, the Olympic cartel, because they were dealing in not only drugs, but we were dealing in petroleum, foods, and people. So
slavery, in other words.
That's right.
Okay. Well, thanks for being on the show. Having talking to you individually is one thing, but having all of you on one show together is quite a powerful experience. Barbara, would you say a little bit about yourself?
Yes. I was used in CIA black budget operations, many of them of a military nature. I was a mind control victim in these same black budget operations, and I was used as a propagandist by the CIA. to help bring in the New World Order. I was actually a media person. I still am, radio and TV and print journalism. And basically they set me up through a CIA front company to propagate the New World Order through New Age propaganda. That's about the best way I can say it. And that's a comment I want to make. A lot of this New Age material that we see coming out today, it is an Illuminati ploy to bring in the New World Order. It's sort of a diversionary tactic, part of it. It's a way to get people to be complacent and under mass mind control. And that involves a lot of the trance channeling, all those sorts of things. It's a way to sort of lull people into a false sense of security based on a false spirituality.
And now, Barbara, can you, we're going to take a break here in a minute, but will you be able to tell our viewers and our listeners how to distinguish between what seems to be the real material and what seems to be false, some disinformation on the New World Order?
I can try.
Okay. All right, good. And stay with us. We'll be back in just a little while, and with my group from the Insider Secrets to Government Corruption. Okay, we're back, and you're watching Chicago Health Television. I'm down at the Global Sciences Congress at the Seabreeze Hotel in Daytona Beach, Florida. And I'm sitting here with 4 people who know the insider secrets to government corruption. Now, in case you just tuned in with us, we had on the previous segment, everybody introduced themselves, and they talked about what has happened in their life and how they know about this government corruption. So right now, we're going to talk a little bit about how once they've come out and spoken about what's happened in their life, the consequences to their life and their families, and who wants to start with that? Barbara, how about you?
Okay. I can say that I've been under very severe harassment pretty much for the past 4 years, since 1994. And interestingly enough, 1994 was the time at which I started to speak out, not publicly even, but just to tell people some of the things that I'd been involved in.
What did you start saying?
About what?
In 1994, what did you start saying that created
Okay. Well, it was something, I think, about breaking my programming also. But when I broke my programming, which means I started to remember that I had been programmed, that I was leading a double life, in essence, for a number of years, many years. It's when you break your programming, it's very difficult. Now I'm getting a block. See, I'm experiencing the block. Basically, they place blocks on you. But when you break your programming, they'll do whatever they have to do in order to make sure that they re-recruit you, or they can stop that from happening. So if they can't stop you from remembering, they hope that they can stop you from speaking. All right? And some of the things that were done to me, I can tell you, they flew black helicopters over my home at rooftop level. They had surveillance vans sitting across the street from my home, different ones, by the way. There was one there every day, and every night, but they changed frequently. I was followed. I had tails on me a lot. They sent government agents after me posing as somebody else on numerous occasions. I had phone taps. It was like living in a fishbowl. I was also hit with exotic weapons, microwave, pulse weapons, laser weapons, and these are things that can knock you out unconscious. I've been knocked unconscious by these weapons.
All right, let me interrupt for a minute. Now, Chip is a person who would know about the existence of those weapons, right? Isn't that so? You may have even used some of those weapons.
I may have.
Can we go over? You may have. Right. I know you may have. Now, could you say a little bit about that, about those weapons?
I can say that I was a pilot of what they call the black helicopters. We based out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Now we're out of several different areas with those aircraft. I can say that I flew test platforms for the government that we would drop an antenna out of the back over a mile long to test electromagnetic waves, microwaves, and so forth. I can say that we've tested pretty darn impressive laser technology here, and as a matter of fact, just recently we all heard the Air Force announce that they were going to used their laser technology to blow up a satellite in space. I believe that was in October of last year.
Okay. And do you know personally of weapons that could knock people out with like a pulse beam or whatever it was? Are there those such things?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So back to you. So your harassment, is it continuing today?
Oh, absolutely. It happens every day of my life. Every day of my life I wake up and I wonder what's coming next. The important thing, I think it's important, really important for people to know, is you can't let them intimidate you no matter what they do. So I don't. And I go through a lot of bad stuff, but I still keep talking, and they're not going to shut me up unless they kill me.
Okay, good. Is there a possibility of that?
Absolutely. I've had death threats made, not directly to me. I certainly have had them made to my colleagues, people that I was working with, trying to disseminate this information. They've been made to people who were willing to publish my material, my written material, my research on this stuff. Yeah, it's definitely a very risky thing to do.
Yeah, I'll bet. It's scary to be right when the government's wrong or something like that.
Yeah, you got that right.
Okay. All right. Now, who else? Brice, how about you? Will you say a little bit about what happened with you?
Yes, actually in 1987 I began remembering what had happened to me in form of flashbacks, and I actually had a threat made to my life. I was being tailed, my phone was being tapped, and I couldn't understand why anyone would be so interested until I started having more and more memories. But actually I had to be relocated. My therapist was instrumental in helping me be relocated to an island because I received in my purse a book and on the island, and when I was writing the book I was constantly harassed. My car was totally demolished. Everybody that was helping me, their tires were slashed, and I ended up having to move from place to place to place in order to stay alive. I lived in like 6 different states in just a very few years trying to get this book together so that I could go public and stay alive to help my children one day. And I've had the helicopters over my house too. I've had my phone tapped. My phone is always tapped. And the most recent incidents that I had was when my office was totally destroyed by fire on January 1st of this year, as I was helping other survivors and people with what I know as the latest brainwave technology. So it just continues, and then if I didn't think it might have been an accidental fire, they delivered 2 bags of ashes to my home that was from this fire.
Are you afraid for your life?
Actually, I would say that that's a very large possibility. However, I'm really more afraid of living in a society where this continues to happen and where my children are being abused and everyone else is. And so I'm not afraid to die if that's what it takes.
I
lay my life down.
I totally agree. And I want to say something about the car stuff that she was saying. That I was spending at one point an average of $100 a week on car repairs. They repeatedly hit my tires, my timing belt, my radiator, my brakes. They cut my brake line. And they don't want us going anywhere. They want to keep us in a state of virtual, like a hostage. I was actually living in a motel for almost 2 years under unofficial house arrest and with no transportation. That's how bad it got until Ted stepped in and told me to get the hell out of there no matter what it takes. And it took him to break me out of the trance, even thinking that I could get out.
Uh-huh. And Ted has been your deprogrammer?
No. Ted has been my friend, I would say. And Ted is a person that has helped me out. He has been following my case. He has been documenting my case. And he has made depositions so that if anything happens to me, that he, as he says on the deposition on video, we will know why.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Ted was also instrumental in helping me when I was attempting to get out initially, and ways to stay safe and ways of security and what to do and how to document all of my memories and send them out with safety letters so that if anything happened to me or my children, that everybody that has my material was instructed to make it more public.
How did Ted initially get to both of you?
I was referred to Ted through a doctor, a therapist in California, Dr. Catherine Gould, who is been very instrumental in this whole thing of helping ritual abuse survivors mind control.
And Barbara, how about you?
I met Ted last August at the Global Sciences Congress, where I was a speaker for the first time in public about my situation. And Ted was also a speaker there, and that's how I met him.
Okay. Ted, how about you now? Since your involvement with, you were a government employee and everything, and now you're investigating the government, what's happening?
Well, let's see. I really saw no signs of corruption when I was in the FBI. We had a great organization. And frankly, if I had, I would have made an issue out of it. I retired, and I took on a case, triple murder out of North Carolina. I don't want to go into details. We don't have time. But making a long story short, I obtained a confession from one of the assailants. There were 7 people involved in it. And this was a girl that told me that the Dr. Jeffrey McDonald was the case, did not commit those murders. They were committed by my satanic cult group. I went on public television and radio, and people just came out of the woodwork from all over the country, told me the same basic story. And even though I knew nothing about satanic activity, I said, you know, there's got to be something to this, because these people would not, under any circumstances, be able to furnish the same information unless they were individually involved in this. So that's where I first went public. And then after that, the harassment has been, you know, really quite intense at times.
Have you had death threats?
Well, I've had 6 attempts on my life.
Is that so?
Yes. I've had 3 occasions when gunmen were after me, and by divine intervention, I didn't go where I was supposed to go. Strictly by divine intervention, believe me. And I've had the other attempts on my life. The last one was in spring of 1993. I was back in Nebraska investigating what we call the Franklin Cover-Up book, which involved pedophilia, pornography, prostitution, satanic cult. Some of the leading businessmen in the state of Nebraska were identified by the children. 80 children came forward. And these children, these perpetrators have been named in a book, so you don't have to worry about a lawsuit. The Franklin Cover-Up by John DeCamp, Harold Anderson, past publisher of the Omaha World Herald, Bob Wadman, chief of police, Omaha, was named. Eugene Mahoney, who's head of the Nebraska Forestry Service, was named. Other leading citizens were named by these kids as being pedophiles and involved in this ring. But anyway, the last time an attempt was made on me to harm me, I was driving from Omaha to Lincoln, and lug nuts had been loosened on the right front wheel and the left front wheel of the car, and it came off when I was doing about 75 miles an hour. And I was able to control the vehicle. But this is just, these are the more serious attempts. Otherwise, I've had surveillances. I've had telephone taps, and I have a way of checking to see if I have telephone taps. In fact, I did it in a very logical manner. I had an individual call me, and use a certain name, a name that he never used with anybody else, and within a few days after he called me, he received a phone call at that number, his wife did, asking if so-and-so lived there. So the only place somebody could have picked it up was off telephone tap at my number, right? Exactly. And so those are little techniques that I know about in order to check it out. On the surveillances, you know, very frankly, I chase them out of the neighborhood.
You do?
Ted, tell them how somebody canceled your plane reservations on the way here.
Well, that's right. But I mean, I had what I do when I have a surveillance sitting outside my house, I put on the gun, of course, and I go out and I drive by about 3 miles an hour and just look at him. And I do a U-turn and come back 3 miles an hour and look at him. And then I do that about 3 times, and I come in and right behind him and sit and park and look at him in the rearview mirror. And they get fidgety and they start. I had one guy take off and run a stop sign on me.
Really? Can anybody use that technique, Ted?
Well, not like
I'm going to remember that.
Well, it's very effective because it intimidates the hell out of them. Mm-hmm. And
not anymore.
I've got to tell you this. They come into my house and have been for years when I'm sleeping. Now, these guys are professional burglars, and Chip will tell you all about that. And the reason I know they come in and out periodically, is because they leave little signs. For example, one morning,
That's right.
Calling
They leave
cards.
calling
CIA
cards.
calling cards.
Just to harass you and scare you.
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely.
I had a
Just to
pen
let
in
you
my
know
house.
they were there.
A U.S. government pen. It said U.S. government skillcraft. It was left on my dresser.
well, what it is, they're just letting you know they can get in your house anytime they want to.
Right.
And what happened was one night, I went to bed about 11 o'clock, and I had a letter that I was going to fax the first thing the next morning and left it on my desk. I got up the next morning, it was gone. And then I have folders, boxes with folders in them with the labels up. Every once in a while, I'll look in there, and one of the folders is turned upside down.
And they'll do it on purpose just so that you know that they've been
Yeah,
there.
they're
Just to
trying
remind you that they know exactly what you're doing.
Okay, now we're going to need to take a break, and after this break, we're going to find out from Chip who he thinks is responsible for some of these, the harassment. So stay with us. Okay, thanks for being with us. We have a very powerful show here tonight, and we're returning to Chip Tatum, who's going to tell us a little bit about who's been doing the harassment.
Well, you know, Ryan, in the industry, whenever we get a tasking down to, and what they're talking about is a neutralization, we'll normally use three techniques. We'll intimidate, which is basically what they're talking about, or we'll coerce a target or surrounding individuals of that target, and that's using force of some sort, or we'll terminate them. It's all that simple. It's hard to say exactly who it is, but it's whoever has something to lose, and I think these ladies can probably tell us better than anyone who it is that has most to lose by them coming forward.
Well, you know what strikes me, and I'm thinking about some of the viewers out there, and I'm trying to talk a little bit from their perspective. There might be people who have never heard of any of this before, and they're going to think, they may have all kinds of thoughts. But then why would our government go to such lengths as harassing and telephone calls and doing some of these things? What is it? What do they have to hide? So why would they be so afraid of a woman coming, or a group of women, or some people coming and saying these stories?
Well, the truth is a very powerful thing, and some can't abide by having the truth come out. The atrocities that have been done in the past that are coming out now, we read in major media, is the use of American soldiers for tests and AIDS research, and I think syphilis research. A group of black American soldiers or black Americans were used for that. So the atrocities, and men died from that. I mean,
right.
They physically died from that. It's no different than today. People actually die from the things that these women were used for. I'll tell you that now. Whenever we needed, in the agency, if we needed a talent, if we needed someone to come in that could get close to our target. For example, there was one that we had in Vietnam. We needed someone to get close, and she actually used a knife that had a ice pick edge, and then she'd use venom on the end of it. It would be placed in the base of their skull, and she would assassinate them while they were making love. I wouldn't doubt that these women might be used for something like that in the past. So anyone who wants to come forward and expose this, especially if they're going to tell who their handlers were, there's no statute of limitations there, Ryan.
Right.
Those people can be placed in prison for the rest of their life or receive the death penalty.
I see. So then it makes sense. Now,
may I ask Chip a question? Chip, if you can give a direct answer to this, what agency would be involved in these type tactics? Would it be Special Forces, i.e. CIA trained, or what?
Normally it would be a CIA trained, someone who has gone through that training, but to say that the CIA is involved in this is very difficult, because we don't operate as a single intelligence entity any longer. We work on an international basis. I've worked in the latter years with the agency. I was actually tasked across to an international group that comprised of Danish intelligence, Turkish intelligence, U.S. intelligence, and British intelligence. And we would task on from there. We would pull in talent, ex-Delta Force, ex-Special Forces. We even used African Special Intelligence. So, it really depends. I can tell you now that the orders for a lot of what we did came from some some people associated with the G7 group of countries, not necessarily the United States.
G7 meaning what?
Well, the financial countries that are involved in the G7 summits. So.
Okay, well, thank you all for being on the program today. And now, if there are any viewers or listeners out there, they want to get help, maybe they've been ritually abused, or maybe they're involved in a court case, or they just need to talk about something like this, what would you suggest? Who would they call? What would they do?
Yes, Ryan, I think that people could call in California, there's a LA Women's Task Force on Ritual Abuse, and I have a number where I could refer people to, and that number is area code 213-650-0807. And there's also a group in California called MASA, which is Mothers Against Sexual Abuse, and they could obtain legal defense information there. And I think that this number that I gave you would be probably the best source.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Ted?
I have a number, an 888 number. I'd be glad to help if it's at all possible. I am very, very busy because I don't have a staff or anything. But my 888 number is 888-609-2916.
Okay, thank you. Now, Barbara, don't you have a foundation you're working with?
Not a foundation exactly. I'm trying to start a fund to raise money so that we can investigate and document and legitimize some of these things, that legitimize the fact that these things have happened to us. I do have that, but there's really no phone number that I can give connected with that, because at this point it's my home phone number and I really don't want to give it out.
Okay, fine. So, go ahead.
Yeah, well, another suggestion I have is that people call my 888 number and ask for a copy of my research. It's important that individuals are aware of what's going on, and we have the documentation. Chip has documentation. I have documentation. These ladies have documentation. It's an educational process. And I have my own radio talk show. It's on in the mornings from 8 to 10 on satellite. It's Galaxy 1, Transponder 17, 5.58 audio wide band, where I'm trying to get the word out. I also have my own television talk show in Las Vegas.
What station is that on, and the time?
That's on at station KKJK, Channel 19, non-cable in Las Vegas, Nevada. But I'm doing everything I can to educate people. And, we're not just a bunch of clucks sitting up here. We all have credibility, and we have the research, and we've been there, done that. This guy has, I have, and these two ladies.
Yes, you have, and I can vouch for that. Chip, you also have material available, and I know we've talked about it before, but would you say what you have and give your numbers?
We do. We have a number of books available that is actually the documentation that shows the corruption. Many people talk about the government's involvements in some of these nefarious activities. We have those in books that part of the government harassment that I receive is because I wouldn't turn those documents over to them. I didn't want them to burn out their shredders. They had enough work. So those documents can be obtained by calling 1-800-201-7892 and ask for extension 58. We additionally have a website, and you can access our website, the Black Ops Reporter, by going to www.2.net, scroll down the page and click on Black Ops. And if you'd like to email me, you may email me at chiptatum@aol.com.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks for being on the show, all of you. And I applaud you for being able to come on and say these things. I think it's really hard. It would be hard for me, and I think it would be hard for other people out there, and you're courageous to go ahead and do this. And it's a service that we need, that the country needs. And so stay with us. Chicago Health Television, and let's say that again. So stay with us for Chicago Health Television, and I'm Ryan Elliott. Thank you. I'm like, this stuff.
Because since shortly after I retired, I developed information personally about just extensive corruption in the government, not only at the federal level, but all the way down to the city and state level across this country. And, I have the documentation, I have the research, and I have the personal knowledge, and I have personally investigated many of these situations. That's basically an overview.
Well, when you say corruption, there's a specific kind of corruption you're talking about that you focus on. Isn't that true?
No, really, corruption is pretty all-inclusive of I have information about corrupt judges, corrupt law enforcement, prosecutors, county officials, judges, and it runs the gamut. It's not really specific at all unless you, and as a matter of fact, it includes a number of areas. Like, for example, I have developed information in Nebraska in a case I investigated at other levels, not only the White House, and it just basically runs the gamut.
Well, is there some overarching or underpinning ideal or idea, some purpose behind this corruption rather than just making a little money on the side or whatever? Isn't there?
The bottom line is to take over the country and the world.
For what, though?
Power, greed. This goes back over 200 years, back to 1776, with the establishment of an organization known as the Illuminati. Mm-hmm. And if your listeners don't know what the Illuminati is, they need to run down to the library and look it up and do some research, because on May the 1st, 1776, a fellow named Adam Weishaupt, German, set forth 25 goals at the request of the Rothschild group that they needed to initiate in order to take over the world. We're talking about destroy the sovereignty of countries and destroy religions. And that's where it really started in modern day. And right to the 80s, involving international trafficking of children and kidnapping that ties into an organization in Washington, D.C. known as the Finders, which is a covert CIA operation, has been active since the early 1960s. I've furnished this information to authorities, Attorney General of the United States, to the FBI. Nobody does anything about it. Now, if that isn't corruption, I don't know what is. That's corruption at a major level.
Oh, yes. And what you're doing here at the Global Sciences Convention is talking about corruption that is related to Brice and Barbara and Chip, isn't that so?
That's true. It all overlaps. It involves drugs, involves pornography, involves prostitution, it involves cults, pedophilia. There's people, as Chip will tell you, the CIA is involved in bed with the mob, the mobsters, and the people in the White House that have been active in blackmailing people, individuals, and also other in the FBI for 27 and a half years. And at the time of my retirement in 1979, I was the senior special agent in charge of the FBI Los Angeles office. I had over 700 people under my command. We had, for jurisdiction, most of Southern California, over 14 million people within the area over which we had jurisdiction. And let's see, I was honored as the Outstanding Law Enforcement Officer of the Year in 1977 by the AFL-CIO Metal Trades Union in Los Angeles. I was asked by Attorney General Griffin Bell when I retired to coordinate security for the Pan American Games. I worked as a consultant for the '84 Olympics, and I was a consultant to the California Narcotic Authority when Governor Brown, Jerry Brown, was governor.
Well, you certainly had a lot of experience, haven't you?
Well, yeah, I probably overdid it, but as far as my introduction is concerned, but I figured I'd throw in the kitchen sink.
No, that's important.
Well, it's important to establish credibility.
Exactly.
And I have credibility, in spite of the fact that many people would like to say I don't have credibility because...
Well, welcome to Chicago Health Television. I'm here with 4 people who have just given a seminar called The Insider Secrets to Government Corruption. And Chip Tatum is one of the people. Welcome to the show. Also, Ted Gunderson, welcome to the show. Brice Taylor, welcome. And Barbara Hartwell, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Okay. Now, I'm going to just direct the questions to each and every one of you. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about what you were doing and what the purpose of the seminar was. So many of our viewers and listeners have not really had exposure or especially detailed information about what we're doing. So if you could just simply generalize and tell us what's going on with the insider corruption. Who'd like to start?
You want me to start?
All right, Ted.
Why me?
First, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I was